Today we're going to talk about square pleat intersections. So this is a exploration of the options that you have instead of doing a closed square twist when you have four mountain folds coming together all into a single point on a square grid. And when you first see these patterns, you might think that you need to pre-crease everything. But that's just not the case. And so I'm going to show you three different variations on these square pleat intersections and some ways that you can start using them to create tessellations. So first off, we're going to explore our options here. I'm going to mark our mountain folds, and we're going to have four quadrants on this grid. This is a 16-fold square grid. And I'm going to mark all of my mountain folds 4 spaces in from the edge. So we'll have 4 equal quadrants, or quarters of the paper, however you choose to phrase it. And so we'll have these intersections of pleats, but I've only marked the mountains. I haven't marked the valleys. So what makes these intersections different is how the valleys are arranged among the mountains. And there are 4 different ways. There's the completely rotationally symmetric way, where you can have your mountain fall down onto the valley in a rotationally symmetric way, and I drew my arrows not all at the same distance, but here we have the rotationally symmetric case, and that's going to make a twist. But if we want something else, we want something that's not completely rotationally symmetric, then we're going to have places where the arrows out from neighboring mountains are moving away from each other. So we'll take that as an assumption for the next part. And whatever a line does, the rest of the line must do also. So I'm going to take this one and say this one's out this way, and this one, let's say that that is one of our spaces that are moving away from each other. Now we have options here. This bottom part, I'm going to choose to have it also go away. And then let's take this top one, for example. This is fixed. And by the way, this is fixed as well. So when I decide what to do with this pleat in between, that will determine what we get. We're basically doing a sampler of the 4 different ways of moving these pleats around. And let's say that this one is going this way. I'm working a bit from memory here off of a lesson that I made for the Tessellation Starter Sequence, which isn't out yet, but you can check out the link in the description to see where you can get notifications about that. This one, instead of out and out, I'm going to do out and in. And then this final one, I'm going to do almost all around in the same direction, but one of them I'm going to break the pattern. So this is a closed square twist, a out on both square intersection, an out and in, so I call this an inner intersection, and this one's an odd intersection because it's got these 2 out, and then the other 2 are more rotational and less mirror symmetric, like these. So we'll see in the next stream that I do next week that these two intersections can be decomposed into two 45-degree intersections. But bringing it back to where we're at right now, we want to get these things folded. So let's take this one for example. I'm going to bring up all of my mountain folds, and I'm going to start pushing the mountains over their respective valleys. So I'm following the arrows. And this is where looking at a crease pattern first isn't necessarily helpful. So when we have just where the mountains go and like what grid lines the mountains are on and how they fall over the valleys, it can be a lot easier to then get this intersection into place without worrying about lines underneath. So we're bringing this intersection up and making sure that the top is very pointy, making sure that all of my mountains are laying down on their proper valleys. And then I'm going to pinch things, and I get to choose here which way this flap lays down. I'm going to lay it down this way semi-arbitrarily. So now that we've got this intersection in place, let's open it up and see what other folds we made. So we've got this box of folds down in here, mostly valleys with some mountains. And let's see, are we missing other information? Well, we've got these valleys coming out here as well as we expected from the arrows. And then we have mountains over here. So that's what I call an outer pleat intersection. Again, what we did is we brought up the mountain lines that are folding all the way through. We laid those mountains down onto their parallel valleys, and then we picked a direction that that flap of paper would lay down in, all without doing extra pre-creasing from the start of the grid. So usually when you see this kind of thing, you would want to pre-crease this box, but you don't actually have to. If you can see that, hey, this is a pleat, this is a pleat, this is a pleat, this is a pleat. They're coming in and intersecting and having this interaction. So then next up, let's take a look at the odd intersection. I'm going to again bring up my pleats, and this time for the odd intersection, I'm actually going to, so it's going to look like I'm making a twist, and I'm going to let it start laying down that way and make sure that my valleys are actually on grid lines. And then I notice that this flap actually needs to fold over and follow the arrow. So I'll let it fold over that way. I'm just going to emphasize the point where these mountains intersect and fold this flap down on top. So once again, I was not paying attention at all to whatever was going on the inside. If I was looking at a crease pattern of this, I would be seeing, oh, hey, I've got this valley fold coming in, and then I have these valleys over here and these other mountains as well. But we don't need to actually pay attention to any of that going on. We just need to extract the information that is, okay, this is where my mountains are, and they're going to fold over on these valleys, and whatever happens in the middle is whatever needs to happen to make it lay flat. Sounds pretty straightforward. Then for our third pleat intersection, we have our inner intersection, and this one is going to get a little bit more interesting. So once again, I'm bringing up my mountain folds, and here I'm just going to let this be a pleat overlap for right now. I'm bringing up my mountain folds, and I know that they need to lay down in this orientation. I just need to figure out how to squash this in the center. And what I'm actually going to do is flip these two out to get the pleats, or sorry, to get the inner folds we did for the outer intersection, and then bring them in at the end. And notice what I'm doing here. I'm letting this flap stick out as I bring the edge in. So this is a tactic we could have used for the odd intersection as well. We could have said, okay, it's just like an outer intersection. I'm just bringing this flap in, and I would have the choice of exactly how I bring the flap in. But here with the inner intersection, we need to keep this paper out of the way, because if we have them both coming in and crossing, then they're going to self-intersect. So with this inner intersection, let's take a look at the crease pattern. We've got that same box. So we've got our valleys, and make sure that I'm finding everything correctly. So we've got the same box outline, but we use the folds differently. So I'm going to end up with a mountain in these locations and actually get valleys in here. So what this is saying is, because I changed from valley to mountain across this mountain line, that means that the mountain was already folded before that other fold came through. So folding this back up, if we recognize the box, then we can pre-crease the box by folding the outer intersection. So we don't need to be super picky about exactly how we fold this, and then we're going to flip the pleat in to follow the arrows and get that pleat intersection. So this one has a little bit more complexity on the inside, and you could, for example, use this to bring something up and squash or whatever you wanted to do. Then the fourth intersection, the one that's rotationally symmetric all the way around, that's a closed square twist. So in this orientation, as we bring up our mountains, lay them down on the appropriate side of valley, there's actually no way to get this to lay down flat without erasing the central intersection and basically pushing those mountains further out. So these mountains that are drawn on here for the center of the square are not existing in the final crease pattern. They're just what we use to set it up. So that's the 4 different options that we have when we have 4 mountain folds running into each other on a square grid. Or I should say 4 pleats where the mountain folds are all coming to the same point. So then how can we take these options and use them to create more patterns? Well, the trick is in what I mentioned at the beginning. The arrows along one pleat have to match with whatever's going on with the neighboring intersection. And there's a couple ways that you can do that. The easiest way to do that is to take your pleat intersection and then basically draw a box around it and mirror that intersection. That will guarantee you that you're getting the same orientation throughout. And it looks like this one draws that mirror box a little further out than this one, but these are actually the same idea. They're using all these inner intersections in a mirrored orientation. This one just happens to draw that mirror box closer in, and so you get a denser feel to it. Both of them on the back have these boxes that look like they're over, intermediate, and under, over, intermediate, and under, and you can space them however you like. You can also do that mirrored option with the odd intersection. So this is the odd intersection mirrored everywhere. And here you get these interesting flaps that you could choose to do other things with. This is kind of a floating bricks type of deal. And you get this very closed, almost woven looking, more like stack of dominoes looking thing on the back. And then these bricks on the front with the odd intersection. And then you have more choices than simply mirroring around as well. You can also do rotationally symmetric arrangements. So if you have an intersection, here I have an outer intersection. You can tell because it's the same whether you flip the flap one way or the other. You can say, hey, I want to do this in a rotationally symmetric way, so each corner of the twist is a position of rotational symmetry. And then those rotational directions, notice that this one is curling around right-handedly, this one is curling around left-handedly. And we get this alternation between the right-handed and the left-handed swirls. So that's cool. And you can do that with any of these options. The one thing to keep in mind with this outer intersection is the difference between mirroring and rotating is really just down to which way you choose to flatten the flaps. So I could have chosen different flap orientations, and that would disrupt the rotational symmetry in the pattern and make it a mirrored one instead. You can also decide to mix and match. So I could choose to change one pleat on each of these and make them both odd intersections. That is another option. So once you have these intersections in place, you can really play with them and see all the different options available. Just like with the triangle intersections that we talked about last week, we can really play with those intersections and get different options in different places. So let's grab another 16-fold grid and start folding. And I just noticed, Nancy, your question. I'm working on fairly small paper, 16-fold grids on a square, and we're sticking with the square grid, not putting in any of the other folds before we do our intersections. So for today's purposes, I'm going to do kind of a freestyle folding. So I'm going to start by noticing, okay, where is the center of my paper? I'll mark that. And if I want to have as many of these as possible, I'm going to give each intersection a 4x4 box of grid spacings. So I'll just mark the boundaries of those boxes, or rather mark the boundaries of one box. And from here I can already say, hey, my mountains are going to form this grid, and I can go ahead and draw out all of the mountain folds that I'm going to use, and then I'll have as many options as possible while still being very certain of where my mountains need to be. So this is kind of helping to orient us on the paper while still giving us the freedom to fold whatever pattern we like. So if y'all want to give input to this situation, I'm just going to start folding random intersections, and at some point the pleats are going to constrain things. Go ahead and write in outer, inner, odd, or twist, and I'll incorporate that into the pattern as I can. So I'm going to start with one of these intersections around the center, and I'm going to arbitrarily choose to make this an outer intersection. So I'm going to have my pleats going like this, and I'm going to arbitrarily choose that it's going to fold over, up, and to the left. So, boom, there's my first intersection. And I really do encourage you to play with this, freestyle it, do it your own way. You don't need to strictly follow what I'm doing. Then I'm going to come around and go to the next intersection. And this one, I'm going to have the peak point over in the same way, but I'm going to do it with an inner intersection, because why not? And so as I'm bringing this up, these are the orientations of pleats that I'm going to want eventually, but I'm going to get my next folds in place as an outer intersection, then bring the flap in on each one. Okay. So since I did an inner intersection here, I can't keep the flap folded over in the same orientation. But what I can do, let's see, I can do an outer intersection that comes into the center, or I could do an odd intersection. Let's see if I do, let's just play with it and see what happens. I'm going to start folding it as an outer intersection because that's the easiest to get all of my new creases in place. And I kind of do like it folding in towards the center. Then the next intersection, I'm going to open my pleat overlap. And let's see, I've got 2 pleats already fixed in place. I'm going to do this one odd. And so I've got both of these coming in towards the center. This one is odd because we can see these 3 pleats lining up together, which we don't see in either the outer or the inner intersections. And here I'm really just going for practicing these intersections. I'm not going for any particular rotational symmetry or repeating pattern. Then the next intersection, I'm going to, again, arbitrarily choose for it to be a twist. And so I can set that up and squash it. Then the intersection out from that, let's see, I want it to be an inner intersection, so I'm going to make my creases as an outer and then bring those flaps in. And this is really close to the edge. Actually, I think I'm going to leave it as odd to make that edge flap nicer. And here we're kind of getting into like, well, but what if you actually did do some, actually I'm going to do it odd the other direction. What if I did do some pattern involving the rotational symmetry, and I can have this be a repeating motif if I want. But regardless, I'm going to come around and grab this next intersection, which I'm going to arbitrarily decide is going to be an inner intersection with the corner coming in towards the center, which means that I want to get this water bomb base functionally squashed flat in the beginning, and then I can shift it to wherever I want it to go. I end up reversing some of the creases of the water bomb. Then I'll open the next pleat overlap. And these two are coming in towards each other, so I guess that could be an inner intersection, or I could do an outer intersection like this. And I'm just going around and making stuff up. I'm going to do this one odd. Again, setting it up like an outer intersection with that base, and then I'll bring the small flap around. Again, completely arbitrary what I'm doing here. And then I'll do the next intersection and twist it. Why not? And you can get some amount of the squash of the twist done in the collapse process if you're careful about it, and usually also if you're close to the edge, but it's not gonna make a huge difference if you point the tip and then squash, or try and get it rotated around as much as you can. This one looks like it wants to be an outer intersection, so I'll do that. And again, I'm making completely arbitrary judgments here. I'm not saying anything about like the actual physical properties of the paper. This one here, I don't know, may as well do an odd arrangement. Have this one come in like so. And I'm really trying to do different things in different places so we get as much practice as possible with these different kinds of intersections. And then coming around over here, I'm going to, so this one is this way, I'm going to do an outer intersection that lays out like that. And then this one, let's do a twist. The next one, so opening my pleat intersection all the way up there. Let's do an odd intersection. And then let's see if we can get an inner for the last one. These two need to lay down that way. Let's see. Getting all my folds in the right places. As you get close to the edge, it can be a little bit more fussy. This one, we could do, yes, we could do an inner that way. I'm going to need to squeeze this in here to get my folds in the right places, and then I'll bring this one in. And so we're able to get this hodgepodge of shapes that looks like it has no possible repeats, but there's definitely structures in here that could be repeated. So for example, this this twist with the odd and outer, odd, and you could do odd and outer all the way around and then mirror that. You could have some kind of other relationship in here. Like I could choose to have, for example, I could meet this odd with an outer. So really we've got this outer odd outer set, and I could choose to repeat those in a different horizontal arrangement, make space between the large repeats, but I don't really have enough space to do any of that on this particular piece of paper. So I want to show you one more thing that you can do with these intersections. So I just went through and arbitrarily put the intersections on the paper. Then I can, if I want, go through and start changing them to twists and start getting another twist. In order to twist this one, I need to change 2 pleats. And you'll notice as I start twisting these, their neighbors might also want to start twisting. Coming around, I can get this guy to twist, and then I want this one to twist, and I noticed that, well, I just folded the neighboring twist in half, but that's not all bad, because since these are closed twists, I can just change the pleat orientations on all of them and bring up that twist in another orientation, another rotational sense. Can bring up another, and get this whole corner into twists. So these pleat intersections are completely substitutable with twists. And you can just go around, and this is really the easy way to get a bunch of twists on a piece of paper, by getting the contraction with the pleat intersections. We can then go around and just squash things. Makes it a lot easier. That twist out in the corner, we're going to need to reverse directions as well. And so whether you get a twist or a pleat intersection, it's all about where the mountains are folding over and keeping those arrows to the valleys on both ends of the pleat consistent. So we can take this and convert the whole thing into twists if we want. Here we've got something a little bit more complicated at the edge, because I have this flap that got folded up and under, but I can release that flap and get another twist. So you can end up with a completely twisted piece of paper, tessellation, and notice how those mountain lines that I drew are crossing the paper. So if I have this line coming in from the left edge, it then goes up and over and down and over and up and over and down and over. It's creating these squiggles across the page from what used to be a straight line. And so then you can keep track. Okay, this pleat had an arrow down, this one had an arrow up, this one arrows down, this one arrows up, this one arrows down. And see all of these different options. While on the back, you can also keep track of which way these arrows are going. So if you're looking at the way the flap is laying down, that also tells you which way the mountain laid over the valley. And so we're able to see what each of these intersections are from the back as well as the front. So when we've got an inner intersection, it creates these 3 levels. When we have an outer intersection, it also creates 3 levels, but it's more ambiguous because we have 2 that are highest and then 2 that are lower, and then 1 is lower than the other. Whereas with the inner intersection, the 2 that are the same are in the middle. With the odd intersection, I actually have 4 distinct levels that I can run into. And with the twist, they're all cyclic. So there's kind of 4 levels, but there's kind of just 1 level because they cycle like a Escher staircase. So that is what I wanted to teach you about the square intersections without precreasing. And you can learn more about this particular topic. I came up with this exercise for a Tessellation Starter Sequence class. And I'll be opening the starter sequence with all recordings. So 50 classes recorded that you can go through at your own speed, at your own pace. You can pause me, replay me, however many times you want. And I'll be releasing that in May. So there's a link down in the description below where you can sign up to be notified when that course opens. We start more or less at this level and then build up to much more complex tessellations over the course of the 50 lessons. So that's all for today. Happy folding, y'all. And I'll see you next week with right triangle intersections.